Good evening and welcome to HOTSEAT with me, Akintayo. We are here at the UNECA's headquarters in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia. And today on HOTSEAT, we'll ask, with all the vast mineral resources on the continent of Africa, why are the people of Africa poor?
Look, this is the paradox of, of Africa's wealth, is that you do have a continent that's, immensely, endowed with natural resources, whether you're talking about oil, minerals, you name it, land even. And yet, Africa still has, a high degree of extreme poverty. This really is the paradox of Africa. And, what it is really is that minerals and natural resources in Africa, even though they present the potential for ending poverty, even though they present the potential for high economic growth, even though they present the potential for, equity in society, they haven't lived up to that promise. And I think that's why we're here today, to talk about, how do we move forward in terms of just getting mineral wealth in Africa to benefit the people of Africa. And I would say three basic things in terms of trying to achieve that. Transparency is very important, because when the citizens know what kind of resources are underneath their feet and what kind of revenue their governments derive from those resources, they're better able to hold their governments to account. And so it's really about tracking these resources from source to service delivery, to services. It's about following the money, so to speak, and tracking the results. So transparency is very important, and on transparency, one of the things that we're asking for, one of the things that we're calling for, is asking governments, first of all, to sign up to the Extractives Industry Transparency Initiative, EITI. EITI really represents a new paradigm in terms of natural resource governance, because it brings about that transparency which enables citizens to hold their leaders to account. Okay. So that's what I'll say about transparency. Another important aspect of this is accountability, which is, the other side of transparency, where governments are being held accountable. When we talk about accountability, Parliament, for example, plays a very important role in terms of oversight. Citizens have to be empowered in order to be able to hold government to account. And the last point on that is participation. This is where we're talking about creating the space for broad-based participation so that citizens are part of that dialogue, about the governance and the stewardship of their resources. And let's get this clear, it is their resources. So those things, I think those are sort of the key elements in beginning to address this issue of natural resource dependence and economic growth. Because until now, what you're finding is that there is almost an inverse relationship between natural resource dependence and economic growth and poverty reduction. The World Bank did a few studies. I know you don't like to hear about studies and statistics.
Yeah, we could go ahead with that.
But the World Bank did a study a couple of years ago, which actually showed that in countries where countries that are dependent on natural resources, the per capita income growth is lower, is slower, so demonstrating really that there is an inverse relationship. And Jeffrey Sachs later did a study as well, which confirmed the statistical significance between this inverse relationship.
Southern Africa is one of the richest parts of Africa, and yet you find out that miners are not happy. And you coming from that sector, what is the true situation?
What has been happening, it's really like a perpetuation of the colonial era legacy. What used to happen then, the exploiters of the minerals would just come and, get as much as possible while giving scattered attention to the issue of the communities, the issue of development. And what we are saying today is that the same legacy is continuing. It now calls for deliberate interventions now from governments including the renegotiation of the contracts. And in that regard, at least the AMV is giving guidance. And we hope that maybe if many of these countries, we know that the African Union has adopted that as the vision and the tool which should bring us out of this cycle of poverty. We really hope that at a national level, many of these countries will adopt those initiatives that are being espoused by the vision. Otherwise, we will still continue to see some skewed contracts which are skewed in favor of capital. And what happens then is that the employers will be able, just one goal, that goal of just excavating and getting as much as they can from the minerals and not paying attention to the development of workers. It's what we are seeing at the moment in Southern Africa.
Yeah, but there is this talk about the employers, the investors not making as much profit as the mine union representatives think, and they get the information wrong. And I remember yesterday I was talking to the executive vice president of Ashanti Gold, and they said they also agreed that they're not doing enough to let people know what is happening inside the organizations, especially the mines. Would you want to agree on that?
I agree that the information we get from the employers is not enough. Sometimes you only get it during industrial action. That's when you hear of figures that within this week we lost a million, how many million of rands or dollars. But during negotiation period, that information is not forthcoming. So it would help. There
is no transparency.
There is no transparency. The issue which was raised by my sister, Dr. Moy, it's true. There is that opacity, but beyond that, there's also, of course, the issue of governance. Are the governments themselves transparent? What we've noticed is that in some areas, because I will talk of our situation, say, like in Zimbabwe, for instance, the information we get, because some of the government officials, they are also players these days. They are also miners. And they withhold information as well. So it becomes quite a challenge to negotiate a fair deal for the worker.
Yeah, but Peter, the question I would really want to really ask, maybe we should just hit the nail on the head. Is it really true that these miners, they don't really make enough profits as you think?
No, it's not true. There are some mines which publish their results. Sometimes you read in the press, they'll be talking of millions of dollars, yet they'll be paying maybe the lowest paid worker will be getting around $200, and those are people who will be talking of $200 million profits, like the platinoids companies. So it's not true that they are not making profits. They do make good profits, but the problem is that they don't want to share the profits with the workers.
I think this is exactly the point we are making, Akintayo. I don't really get into the books of these mining companies, but the point really is about transparency, isn't it? It's really about transparency, and even beyond EITI, which I think presents an amazing framework and a new paradigm for governance of natural resources. I think even beyond that, we need to start looking at legally binding measures about public disclosure of the revenues from these mining contracts that governments sign. And the problem is the lack of transparency with these deals, and then these deals in themselves are sometimes just bad deals that don't benefit either the government or the people. So there's a lot really going on there. I mean, we could spend the whole day talking about this, but let me just talk about legally binding measures. I mean, almost 2 years ago in America, because one is an international organization, in America, we were instrumental in passing the Dodd-Frank legislation, which you've heard about all of this week. And within that, there is a Cardin-Lugar Act, which specifically forces all mining companies or extractives company, meaning mining and oil, that are registered on the New York Stock Exchange to publish what they pay to African governments or civil servants, as the case may be. So to publish what they pay for licenses and so on, to be able to extract and exploit in those countries. So in a sense, the sun is already beginning to shine on some of these shady deals, and that's very important.
Yeah, but I would like to ask were the mine union workers involved in all these deals so that they will get to know the details?
But that's what the transparency is for, is to benefit the mine workers, and the citizens in general. So it's not just the mine workers, it's the citizens as well. So the mine workers are sort of the front line, when we talk about wages and so on. And I can't really get into that discussion. That's Peter's
because Peter will get to talk about it.
Yes, but the citizens as well, when it comes to government delivering public goods and being accountable, simple things like health, education, infrastructure, safe water, So we've done that in North America. The European Parliament just a few weeks ago has also agreed and endorsed similar measures. So we're carrying, as I said, the sun is beginning to shine, and would like to see those kinds of legislation and legally binding measures coming to the continent in countries that are mineral dependent, because it is really important. It is about good governance, and good governance entails transparency, accountability, participation, and really just delivering the services and the goods to the people.
Okay, let me have Peter's opinion on that. I think it's good news for Africa when we could have such a thing.
Yes,
what's the contribution of your union?
We are moving in the right direction, but it would help the workers if the unions were involved in all those initiatives.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was asking Dr. Boyer. Were you really involved in the initiatives?
No, we're not involved, and it would really assist even at a national level if we're involved in policy formulations. For instance, we would maybe advocate for the inclusion of certain conditions which assist the worker, conditions like provision for accommodation of the workers, maybe participation in the sharing of dividends during good years. All those things should be embedded in the policy when contracts are issued out. But seeing as we don't have a voice in policy formulations, it becomes a problem.
Yeah, but why don't you also pursue the way you pursue the miners, the mining companies? Why don't you use that vigor, the same passion to pursue government to involve you when they are even bringing in investors into the country, even before they start mining at all?
We try, but sometimes we try, but without much success. Of late, we have seen them trying to, solicit for inputs from workers, but I really believe that it should be done just, for sure, because whatever input we don't see it at the end of the day coming up in the policies. I think we should really sit down together with the government, maybe together with business as well, when making up those policies, so that in the end all our inputs are captured and seriously, so not just for show.
I have a lot of sympathy for the mine workers and the citizens, African citizens, across this continent, because I think what we're focusing on, all of these issues are really about poverty and the potential that the mineral resources provide to our countries to really reduce extreme poverty. Let me give you an example just to put things in perspective. In 2010, the revenue that came from minerals on the continent was over $300 billion.
Wow.
$300 billion compared to aid
from
income,
the Western world.
yes, which was about 48 billion, less than 50 billion. it's a factor of 7 or 8, you know. So just think about that potential. So I think we need to really just focus on how do we, you know, harness these resources so that they benefit the citizens, so that we reduce the inequalities, so that we reduce these human rights abuses, so that we reduce the conflict, you know, and so that governments ultimately are more accountable. Because for me, I look at natural resources really as the next big source of development finance that must be absolutely, you know, harnessed. And that must absolutely be leveraged, because in a sense, the global financial crisis, you know, is almost a blessing in disguise.
Yeah, because I've heard so many analysts saying that Africa should not even feel it at all, even when the rest of the world is feeling the economic recession. Yeah. But
So
yet, the people are still...
So with the global financial crisis, which means that, you know, these sort of traditional donors are dealing with their own fiscal pressures, I think it's really time for us as Africans, together with our leaders and the mining companies and the citizens, meaning civil society and so on, it's really time for us to come back to the table and talk about how do we leverage and harness these resources so that they're benefiting us, they're, you know, creating employment, they're creating infrastructure. Look at Botswana. Botswana has actually been sort of ahead of the curve, you know, in any case. But even more groundbreaking, more recently, Botswana has come up with the legislation that requires all the polishing and cutting of, you know, the diamonds to be done in Botswana. The implication of that is that the high-end jobs are coming home.